The sky above the Dargathi homeworld was a swirl of twin suns and molten clouds, stained red from decades of war. They had conquered 15 systems, enslaved 3 species, and humiliated humanity on live broadcasts for sport. To them, Earth was a backwater joke, a mistake they thought they'd corrected generations ago when they glassed half of Asia and left humanity to rot in orbitless ruin. But something had changed. Signals had gone dark. Outposts on the rim had gone silent one by one. Their warlords laughed it off. Some blamed internal rebellion. Others said it was nothing but faulty comms. No one considered the idea of retribution. Until the sky cracked open. It began with a whisper, not through words, but through the absence of them. An entire sector of their fleet lost contact. Then another. Then 3 dreadnoughts, each the size of a small moon, simply vanished from their long-range telemetry. Then came the Terran Battleship. The Dargathi had never seen anything like it. A black, angular beast with hull plating that seemed to drink light and radiate silence. It appeared without warning, breaching through folded space like a knife through silk. No fanfare, no demand for surrender, just presence. On board, Commander Holt stood alone on the bridge. No crew, no laughter, no distractions. They had all died on Mars. His wife, his son, his unit. The last message he got from home was filled with static and screaming. The Dargathi thought their annihilation was complete, but they didn't know what they'd awakened. The Vindicator was more than a ship. It was a floating grave, powered by rage, fueled by vengeance. Every system had been retrofitted by human engineers in the underground colonies, scavenging ancient tech. Bending forbidden science, ignoring every protocol Earth's lost governments once held sacred, the Dargathi had pushed humans past civilization and into something primal. Holt didn't speak when he fired the first shot. He simply marked the Dargathi war spire as Target 1 and watched as the rail cannon ripped through half a continent. The spire, their central nerve station, collapsed in less than 30 seconds. No one on the ground even had time to scream before they were vaporized. The Terran Battleship drifted past the burning remains of their crown jewel like it was nothing more than dust in space. The Dargathi fleet scrambled. Tens of thousands of ships mobilized across systems, trying to triangulate the Terran ship's position. But the Vindicator didn't leave traces. It didn't operate by known physics anymore. It appeared, struck, and vanished again. And every time it did, another stronghold went dark. It wasn't a war, it was a message, and Holt made sure every second of it was burned into their neural archives. Back in the shadows of deep space, Holt sat in silence, his face gaunt, eyes hollow, voice barely used. But in the quiet hum of his ship, he whispered the names of the dead. One by one, every name, every loss. And when the names were done, he marked the next target. They had laughed when Earth fell, but now even their gods had gone silent. They tried to talk to him. After the 4th system fell silent, the Dargathi High Consul ordered a diplomatic frequency override. Dozens of pleas, commands, and half-hearted threats poured into open space in a dozen languages. One in particular, broadcasted from a golden citadel orbiting their capital world, began with arrogance and ended with desperation. This is High Executor Grawl of the Dargathi Ascendancy. You are hereby commanded to cease fire. Your actions are in violation of the Galactic Accord. Holt cut the transmission mid-sentence. He didn't care for their words. He wasn't here for negotiation. Earth had begged for peace. Earth had followed their rules, bent to their orders, signed their treaties. And Earth had burned anyway. Now it was their turn to feel small. The Vindicator moved like a ghost through their network of colonies, Appearing, killing, disappearing again. There were no survivors, no prisoners. Holt left silence in his wake. Silence. And dread. But his campaign wasn't random. There was a pattern, one the Dargathi failed to recognize until it was too late. Holt wasn't just attacking military bases, he was targeting their architects, their strategists, their thinkers, the ones who designed the invasion of Earth, the ones who called the extermination a preventive cleansing, the ones who broadcasted the image of Holt's son screaming in his mother's arms before the orbital strike turned them into ash. He knew them by name, by voice, by face. They were all dying, one by one. The Dargathi were centuries ahead in tech, at least on paper, but their progress had made them arrogant, soft, dependent on systems they didn't understand anymore. Their weapons were automated, their decisions outsourced to AI that couldn't comprehend hate, grief, or vengeance. They had created a machine civilization, and Holt had become the virus inside it. Their elite war council, the Sovereign Circle, had never even fired a weapon in real combat. Most of them were bred in artificial tanks, genetically optimized for logic and aesthetics. They ruled from behind walls of polished crystal and rarely left their orbital palaces. Holt breached one such palace with surgical precision. He warped in within their no-fly zone, bypassed their quantum defense grid, and fired a single antimatter lance that split the structure in two, top to bottom. It floated in space like a cracked egg, its inhabitants spilling out into the void, their bodies freezing and fracturing instantly. There was no warning shot, no declaration, just obliteration. The Dargathi public, once proud and united, began to fracture. Rumors spread like infection. Some believed the humans had evolved into monsters. Others thought the Terran Battleship was piloted by a demon or a rogue AI that had turned against its creators. Religious cults formed around Holt's ship, calling it the Hand of the Forgotten Son. But they were all wrong. It wasn't a god or a ghost. It was just a man who had lost everything. Inside the Vindicator, Holt barely slept. He didn't need to anymore. The modifications done to his nervous system made sleep optional. Dreams were a luxury he couldn't afford. Besides, when he closed his eyes, all he saw was fire. All he heard were screams. His face was gaunt, not from starvation. The ship's nanotech kept him alive, regenerated his cells, even rebuilt damaged muscle. No, the hollowness was from something deeper, a place beyond rage, beyond sorrow. He didn't speak to anyone. There was no one left. But he did record. Every strike, every death, every name of the Dargathi leadership he eliminated was added to a data log, a public one. And it was transmitted into Dargathi networks after each mission. Brutally edited footage of his assaults, the names of the victims, the crimes they committed on Earth, all made into undeniable truth. He was forcing them to remember, not just the deaths, but the why. On the 39th day of his campaign, the Vindicator entered the Ilgora system, a mining hub that had once drained the Earth's moon of resources during their occupation. It was fortified, heavily. The Dargathi had positioned over 300 warships to defend it. Thousands of plasma batteries, graviton mines, and cloaked drone swarms floated in a 3-layered perimeter. They thought they could finally stop him here. But Holt didn't plan to break through. He planned to make a point. The Vindicator didn't fire on the warships, not at first. Instead, Holt hacked into the system's atmospheric regulators. He redirected fusion core exhaust through the civilian HAB stations, a method they had used on Earth once to pacify resistance. Now their own miners and workers were choking on toxic clouds. By the time the Dargathi warships realized what was happening, over 2 million civilians were dead. The footage was streamed live, not by accident. Holt wanted them to see it. He broadcasted only one sentence afterward. "This is what you taught me." Then he opened fire. The defense fleet, still reeling from the horror of the gas attacks, couldn't react fast enough. Holt deployed a series of autonomous micro-torpedoes, each one loaded with black matter bombs, forbidden by every interstellar treaty. They didn't explode in light. They exploded in absence, erasing matter, folding ships inward, leaving behind only silent, collapsed bubbles of crushed steel and bone. The fleet lasted 11 minutes. The Dargathi had no word for genocide anymore. They'd removed it from their language after enslaving the Vihari, back in Cycle 774. But now, watching their people crushed, burned, suffocated, they remembered what it looked like. And they were afraid. On the capital world, chaos reigned. The High Executor's palace was under siege by his own generals. Civilians rioted in the streets, screaming for explanations, for revenge, for surrender. Their news networks couldn't hide it anymore. Every day brought new footage of another colony burning, another leader gone. And always, the Terran ship above, unmoved, silent, watching. There were whispers now among the Dargathi ruling class of invoking the Doomsday Accord, releasing the ancient weapons buried in their core worlds. But even that required consensus, and Holt had already assassinated 3 of the 5 council members capable of authorizing it. The Dargathi Empire was crumbling, not because of the number of ships lost, but because of what Holt represented. Shame. They had lost to a species they considered inferior, a man they thought dead, a world they had dismissed as weak. But humans didn't die easy. They changed. They evolved under pressure. They became what they needed to be. Holt sat in the dark, watching the riot feeds on his ship's console. The Dargathi were beating each other in the streets, setting fire to government offices, throwing statues of their warlords into acid pools. It was beautiful in a way, the same chaos Earth had lived through, now mirrored in the homeworld of its tormentors. He whispered his son's name under his breath. Then he spoke to the ship. Next. The screen flashed, the final colony on his list. A fortress planet deep in the Ascendancy's core territory, the one where they built the device that had decimated Earth's atmosphere. Holt had seen the footage once, a high-ranking Dargathi scientist laughing as the device fired, calling it a mercy kill. He wasn't going to give them mercy. He was going to give them memory. The Vindicator turned, silent as ever, and vanished into folded space. Back on the Dargathi homeworld, Executor Graal locked himself in his command chamber. He was shaking, not from fear, but from something worse. Realization. The humans had survived, and worse, they had learned. The final colony wasn't marked on any public star map. It wasn't part of the known systems under Dargathi rule. They called it Kovarath, though the official records listed it only as designation Fafinal. It was a prison world, a lab, and a burial ground all in one. It orbited a dying blue star whose radiation fried all known organic scanners. It was designed to be invisible, and it was meant to be forgotten, especially by its victims. But Commander Holt hadn't forgotten anything. The Vindicator arrived in silence, dropping out of folded space like a blade sliding through cloth. No alarms, no defense batteries, no welcoming fleets. This place wasn't protected the same way as the others, not because it was weak, but because it was cursed. Kovarath was where they built the atmosphere disruptor, where they tested it, where they perfected it, and it was where they sent the captured humans who didn't die fast enough in the first assault. Scientists, soldiers, civilians, they called them test stock. Holt had found that phrase in an intercepted memo. He'd read it while scraping blood off the floor of the last Dargathi command center he raised. It was written casually, like they were discussing farm animals. Test stock. That word alone had cost them 4 colonies. The surface of Kovarath was ugly, not in a natural way, but in the way only cruelty makes something ugly. There were no cities, no habitats, just steel towers punching through cracked stone, lit with cold, flickering bio-furnace lights. The towers pumped smoke into the air constantly, not to power anything, but to keep the planet's surface toxic. A permanent gas chamber. The Vindicator didn't land. It didn't need to. Holt used the ship's orbital piercer, a modified drill drop pod, and launched himself straight through the atmosphere, through 2 kilometers of smog, and into the upper tier of Tower 9, where the original weapon blueprints were stored. He didn't bring backup. He didn't have any. He didn't wear insignia, didn't scream, didn't warn. He was the warning. The pod's impact shattered the tower's support beams, collapsing 3 floors instantly. Dargathi workers screamed and ran in all directions. Alarms blared in discordant tones. The defense bots turned to face the threat, but Holt had already moved. He stepped out of the smoking wreck, armed with nothing but a magnetic blade and a shock gauntlet. Low-tech. Old Earth stuff. The kind that didn't rely on power sources. The kind that kept working when everything else fried in the electromagnetic chaos. The first strike took off a guard's arm. The second buried the blade into a scientist's chest. Holt didn't slow down. Every room he entered, he cleared. Every face he saw, he judged. Some died fast. Some screamed for mercy. One tried to speak English, to beg. Holt put a round through his kneecap and let him crawl for a bit before ending it. He wasn't killing out of rage anymore. He was doing it for the record. Every hallway was tagged with a live stream drone. Every kill was logged. Every floor was marked with a name. Earth cities, Earth schools, Earth hospitals that the Dargathi had flattened with sterile pride. Now each of them was engraved into the bodies Holt left behind. "Remember Chicago," he whispered to one of the researchers, before snapping his neck. He reached the lab core in under 11 minutes. The doors were blast-sealed, encoded with a biometric lock that was supposed to only recognize the chief engineer. Holt held up the severed hand he'd taken 3 levels up. It slid across the scanner, and the doors hissed open. Inside, the walls were lined with test data. Screens still flickered with energy readings. Simulations ran in loops, human oxygen levels crashing, cellular rupture, organ failure, a slow, precise genocide perfected over decades. And then he saw them, the stasis tanks, rows of them, dozens, maybe more. Frosted glass, faintly illuminated from within. Figures floated inside, still alive, barely. Humans, old, young, some with prosthetics, some with burns that would never heal. Test stock that had been forgotten even by death. Holt stared at them in silence. He could end their pain right now. Open the tanks. Let them breathe real air one last time. But instead he turned to the command console and downloaded every file, every name, every document, every piece of data proving what the Dargathi had done here. Then he triggered the purge. The Firestorm protocol melted the tanks. Bodies dissolved instantly. Holt didn't flinch. This place wasn't salvation. It was a tomb. And the dead didn't need to suffer anymore. He walked out through the flames, data drive in hand, and marked Kovarath for orbital cleansing. Back aboard the Vindicator, Holt uploaded the files to the galactic network. He didn't alter them. He didn't need to. The Dargathi crimes were written in their own language, their own signatures, their own pride. Now the galaxy could see it too. Within an hour, dozens of species condemned the Dargathi. Systems broke off from their empire. Trade routes were severed. Civil unrest exploded across their colonies. Dargathi diplomats were attacked in neutral zones, and in the darkest corners of space, whispers grew louder. about the Terran ghost who burned empires and walked alone. On the Dargathi homeworld, the executor watched the footage from Kovarath in silence. For once, he didn't speak. There was nothing to say. His empire had built Kovarath as the crown jewel of dominance. Now it was the nail in their coffin. One of his aides entered the chamber, breathless. "Executor, the citizens demand—" "Let them demand," he interrupted, voice quiet. "Soon they'll have no breath left to shout." Back on the Vindicator, Holt sat in the captain's chamber, a room meant for strategy, now dark and quiet. He stared at the screen. Only one target left. The Dargathi homeworld itself. The place where they celebrated Earth's annihilation with fireworks made from human ash. He loaded the targeting matrix. The ship vibrated as power charged into its main cannon, a solar siphon beam that could punch a hole through a planet's mantle. But he paused. Not from doubt, from something heavier. This was it. The last one. He could end it all now, erase the Dargathi from history, just as they tried to do to Earth. He took a breath, and for the first time in years, he thought of something other than death. He thought of his wife's voice, the way she laughed when the sun hit the windows in the kitchen. He thought of his son, running barefoot through the garden, chasing the old dog that never barked at strangers. He thought of life, not revenge, not war, but what they stole from him, and how it would never come back. He closed his eyes and gave the order. "Fire!" The screen blazed white. The Dargathi homeworld had no name anymore. It used to be called Joras, which meant radiant cradle in the old tongue. That name was scrubbed from records a century ago, replaced with a numerical designation, Core 1. The elites said it was for efficiency, for clarity in administrative files. But everyone knew the truth. You don't name something when it becomes a machine. Core 1 was a city planet. Glass towers stabbed the sky. Layers upon layers of infrastructure spiraled down into the planet's crust. Massive monorails zipped across steel spires, ferrying executives and warlords who never once stepped into the streets. The lower levels were smog-choked, flooded with synthetic fog to hide the poverty. Above, the upper echelons floated in gravity-shielded luxury. It was perfect in their eyes, unblemished, unbreakable. And now they were watching it fall apart. The streets were burning. Civilians looted food tanks. Armed soldiers had started deserting. Communications from the outer systems had gone completely dark. Their fleet, once the most feared in the quadrant, had been reduced to half strength, and most of the admirals had stopped responding to the central command. Fear was now their only broadcast. In the high spire, Executor Growl stood at the edge of the throne balcony. The clouds above the capital city swirled with violet lightning. The air smelled like burning rubber and melting steel. Riots had broken containment in the lower blocks. 10,000 deaths in the last 12 hours, not from war, but from starvation, panic, and civilian shootouts. "We should surrender," one of the remaining ministers muttered. He was shaking so badly his prosthetic eye kept flickering out of sync. Growl didn't look at him. "To what?" "The Terran," the minister whispered. "To Holt." Growl laughed, not out of amusement, but from pure, sharp-edged bitterness. "You think he wants surrender? He's not interested in our terms. He's not here to negotiate." "We can give him the stasis records," another voice chimed in. "We can show him we've cooperated. Maybe he—" Growl turned slowly. "He burned an entire star system for cooperation. He choked our civilians with our own gas. He didn't come for signatures. He came for judgment." Silence settled over the room, and then the alarm sounded. For a moment, no one moved. Then a screen blinked into view, showing the orbit above Core 1. The Vindicator had arrived. It didn't broadcast a message. No countdown, no posturing, just a visual, a black shape hanging above their world, completely motionless. Not a ship, a sentence. On board the Vindicator, Holt sat in the center of the dark command bridge, staring down at the blue marble beneath him. This was where it started. This was where the First Order was signed, where they'd laughed over wine and orchestrated Earth's downfall like it was a puzzle to be solved. His fingers hovered over the targeting interface. The solar siphon was primed, planet breaker capacity. He could crack the crust and boil the oceans. He could make sure Core 1 never saw another sunrise. And yet, he waited. Not because of hesitation, but because he wanted them to feel it. He opened a transmission, not a message, but a mirror feed. He broadcasted the interior of his ship directly to the Dargathi media networks, letting them see him, the man who had made their empire bleed. They stared at the gaunt face, the scars, the hollow eyes. He didn't speak, but on the feed, the screen behind him played a loop. Footage from Earth, from before, a child playing in a garden, a woman laughing as she stirred something on a stove, the distant sound of birds, of a dog barking, of wind in real trees. It didn't look like propaganda. It looked like a memory, and that was the dagger, because it reminded them who he used to be and what they'd destroyed. In the control tower, Graal finally broke. "Enough," he whispered. "Bring me the relic." His aides hesitated. "You heard me," he roared. "Go to the vault and bring it. We end this now." Deep beneath the high spire, in a vault made of neutron glass and layered steel, they kept something secret, a contingency, a weapon so old and forbidden even the war archives had redacted its name. The voice of God. It was a transmission array developed in the early years of the Dargathi expansion, capable of sending a pulse through folded space directly into the neural cores of synthetic intelligence, meant to enslave or destroy AI from across entire sectors. But it was outlawed after it melted the minds of 3 planetary populations accidentally linked to hybrid systems. Graal didn't care about accidents anymore. He wanted the Vindicator destroyed, or at least disabled long enough to breathe again. The device was brought up, connected to the comm grid, and aimed at Holt's ship. The engineers warned Graal it could backfire. He didn't listen. His finger hovered over the activation glyph. "This ends now." He pressed it. The pulse tore through the upper atmosphere. And then, nothing. No reaction. The Vindicator hung still. For 2 minutes, they thought it had worked. Then the sky screamed. The ship split into 7 copies, visual echoes, trailing black fire across the sky. Each copy rotated into a new orbit surrounding Core 1 like vultures over a corpse. The real Vindicator activated its targeting array. And then the message came. Not audio, visual. A single sentence appeared across every screen on the planet. "Your God speaks no language I fear." And then came the strike. The solar siphon didn't just burn the capital, it carved a hole. From the upper atmosphere down through the towers, the monorails, the luxury platforms, the mineral veins, the ancient cities, and finally the molten core. The beam didn't explode, it consumed. Light turned black, air screamed, gravity warped, the high spire evaporated mid-sentence, the throne room vaporized before Graal could even scream. In 10 minutes, Core 1 was dead, not shattered, not obliterated, just empty, a hollow planet, burned from the inside out, still spinning on its axis like it hadn't noticed it was already a corpse. In orbit, Holt watched in silence. He didn't smile, he didn't cry, he simply sat back. It was done. The Empire was no more. The crown jewel, gone. The colonies were fractured, the generals dead, the civilians scattered, leaderless, broken. Across the galaxy, no one cheered. No parades, no celebrations, only quiet, uneasy stares at the sky. Because if a man like that could exist, what did it say about everyone else? On the Vindicator, Holt powered down the main cannon. For the first time since the war began, the ship's weapons cooled. He stood up, walked through the corridor alone, past the bridge, past the crew quarters, long empty, into the chamber where the AI used to speak before he disabled it. There was no noise here, no movement. He opened the cryopod. Inside it, a capsule, a single plant, earth soil, earth seed, earth grown, a tiny green stem reaching up toward a dim light. He picked it up, held it in both hands. It didn't scream, it didn't judge, it just lived. The galaxy was quiet. Not because peace had returned, but because no one knew what to say. Empires didn't fall like this. Not from within, not from a single man, and not with such terrifying precision. Yet the Dargathi were gone. What remained was debris, charred worlds, abandoned colonies, and a fear no amount of diplomacy could dissolve. Every species in the quadrant watched the Terran ship, the Vindicator, as it floated in high orbit over a broken world. It didn't move. It didn't respond to transmissions. It didn't acknowledge the ceasefires or the panicked attempts at alliance. The ghost of vengeance had gone still. Inside, Holt sat in silence. He hadn't spoken in 3 days. The ship's systems had long ago stopped prompting him for interaction. He'd disabled most of the automated comforts, the food synths, the temperature regulation, even the internal lighting. He wanted the dark now. The kind of dark that wrapped around your bones and pulled at everything inside you that once believed in mercy. He hadn't slept. Not because he couldn't, but because every time he closed his eyes, he remembered her face. Not in the moment she died, but before, smiling, laughing, singing to their son in that off-key voice she knew drove him crazy. And the boy? God. There was no sound in the universe louder than the memory of your child's laugh. He stood from the command chair and walked the length of the ship's corridor barefoot. The metal was cold. Every echo of his footsteps felt like it belonged to someone else. A different man. The one who'd once fought wars for ideals, who believed in flags and duty and alliances, that man was long dead. He stepped into the observation deck. The planet below, Core 1, no longer spun with any rhythm. The solar siphon had disrupted its axis. It would never rotate again. Frozen on one side, scorched on the other. Balanced in death. But life still existed in the small cryobay beside him. The plant. It was barely more than a sapling, a fragile thing born from Earth soil he'd carried since the early days of the invasion. Back then, it was a symbol of hope, of someday rebuilding. Now? Now he didn't know what it meant. He reached out and touched the edge of its capsule. It leaned toward his finger like it recognized him. Something twisted in his gut. Regret. Not for the war, not for what he'd done. That was righteous. That was justice. But for what it had cost him, the sliver of humanity that should have felt something more than cold satisfaction. He had taken everything from the Dargathi, but somewhere in the fire, they'd taken something from him, too. His soul. The comm light blinked red. Incoming transmission. He stared at it for a long while before finally tapping it. "Commander Holt," a voice said, carefully formal, cautious, terrified. "This is Ambassador Vesh of the Solari Union. We're relieved you're still alive." He said nothing. Vesh continued. We watched the broadcast, the evidence from Kovarath. We've archived the files, submitted them to the Intergalactic Tribunal." Still silence. The ambassador's voice faltered. Your actions, while outside conventional frameworks, have forced a reckoning. Many of us didn't know, or pretended not to. Holt's lips barely moved. You knew, he said. The voice choked on the other end. You all knew, he said again, louder. You watched them erase Earth and turned away. You sent condolences, not weapons. Commander, please. You let them broadcast the death of my son like it was sport. You told us to stay neutral. You said retaliation would destabilize the region. His voice now was a gravel rasp. So I did. He paused. I destabilized it. Silence, long and heavy. Then, what do you want now, Commander? A fair question. He should have known the answer. But the truth hit harder than any Dargathi weapon ever could. He didn't know. The war was over. But he was still alive. And that was the cruelest twist of all. He left the transmission hanging and walked back to the archive chamber. Thousands of files stored from the Dargathi network. Names, reports, images, videos, screams. They were organized now, cataloged into folders labeled with the names of Earth's fallen cities. One folder per city, one record for every known victim. He scrolled through them slowly. Faces, families, children, scientists, workers, fighters, lovers, survivors who never had the chance to survive. He selected one folder, Redmont District, his neighborhood. The first image was his neighbor, the grumpy old man who always ranted about overgrown hedges and noise levels. The next was the couple across the hall who invited them to dinner twice a month. Then his wife, then his boy. He sat down, and for the first time in years, he let himself feel everything. Out in the galaxy, debates raged. Some called Holt a war criminal, others a liberator. His actions had redrawn borders, destroyed power structures, and left a void no one could fill. The Dargathi remnants, what few survived in outer colonies, were hunted by former allies, desperate to cleanse their names. The galactic economy tanked, trade networks collapsed, and in the power vacuum, chaos grew. Pirates, warlords, scavenger clans, all rising from the ashes. And still the Vindicator remained silent, a sword still sheathed, but ready. Everyone waited. Would Holt strike again? Would he claim a new enemy? Or worse, would he just vanish and leave the galaxy wondering if he was ever truly gone? A week passed, then 2. On day 15, Holt powered up the ship again. But not for war, he opened a comm line. Not to any empire, not to any government, but to a private channel broadcast on ancient Earth frequencies. Simple, narrowband, old tech, obsolete to most. He just spoke. This is Commander Holt of the Terran Battleship Vindicator, he said. To any remaining humans, any colonies in hiding, scattered vessels, or lost signals, I am alive. He let the words settle. You are not forgotten. Earth was not the end. If you can hear this, send coordinates, send signs, I will find you. He paused, then added, and if you need shelter, I'll build one. It wasn't a call to arms. It was a call home. In the days that followed, transmissions trickled in. Some were broken, static-filled. Others were clearer. Heard you. This is Delphi Station. 300 survivors. No food. We've been hiding under an asteroid belt since Cycle 08. 27 still breathing. Please. You did it. You really did it. We never stopped believing. Hope spread like wildfire in the shadows. Holt began collecting coordinates, not to attack, but to gather, to rebuild. The Vindicator became something new, not a weapon, but a sanctuary. He reprogrammed its lower decks into agricultural bays, sleeping quarters, repair docks. AI units were reactivated, but only the ones capable of empathy programming. And the sapling? It was moved to the command deck, its roots dug deep into real Earth soil, and for the first time since the war began. Holt smiled. A twitch. Faint, but real. The first ship arrived after 23 days. It was a rusted freighter, barely holding together with scavenged plating and patched engines. The transponder identified it as Hope's Reach, a refugee vessel that had vanished during the second invasion. The rest of the galaxy assumed it had been destroyed. Executed in the outer rim by Dargathi cruisers for fleeing without authorization. But it had survived. Captain Marin was the one who stepped off the freighter when it docked at the Vindicator's forward bay. She was gaunt, pale. Skin sunken from radiation poisoning that had never been fully treated. Her crew numbered 27. Half were undernourished, 4 were children, but their eyes, they still held something. Not awe, not worship, recognition. "You're him," she said. Holt stood on the bay floor in silence. His armor was still intact, scarred and black, unpolished. He didn't try to look like a leader, just a man. "I'm Holt," he answered. "I was born in Redmont. I watched my world burn." She stared at him a long time, then said, "You didn't just watch." He didn't deny it. Instead, he led them into the ship. They didn't ask for luxuries. Only food, clean water, and quiet. Holt gave them all 3. Within a week, 5 more ships arrived. A battered war skiff from the Neptune colony. A medical corvette long thought lost in the Europa debris field. Even a D-class orbital mining rig, dragged manually through drift space by 3 surviving engineers who hadn't spoken to another soul in years. They brought nothing but broken bodies and burned flags, and Holt took them all. He didn't give speeches. He didn't preach about rebuilding Earth or taking back the stars. He simply made space, cleared rooms, recycled oxygen, replanted hydroponics. The Vindicator, once a weapon, had become a home. But not all the arrivals brought peace. On day 41, a ship calling itself Peregrine Fangs docked without clearance. It was military, ex-militia, Holt guessed, covered in blackened logos and war paint. The crew came off in tactical gear, well-fed and sharp-eyed. Mercenaries. Or worse. Their leader, a man with a pale burn scar down his right cheek, smirked as he approached Holt on the bridge. "Commander Holt," he said, "the ghost in the sky. The butcher of Core 1. Hell of a resume." Holt didn't answer. "I'm Radek. We've been hearing about your little sanctuary." He gestured behind him toward the bustling corridors, where survivors were cleaning equipment and repairing old tools. "People call this place the Ark." "I didn't name it," Holt said. "No, but they did," Radek replied, "because they need something to believe in." He stepped closer. "But belief's dangerous, starts to breed ideas, and ideas without guns get people killed. That's where we come in." Holt's eyes didn't move. "You're not welcome here." Radek smiled. "Oh, I think we are. Because these people? They're scared, hungry, weak. They need protection, and you're just one man with a famous ship." Holt didn't reply. Not with words. He moved. In 1 second, his fist drove into Radek's throat. The merc fell gasping to his knees. The rest of his crew raised weapons, but Vindicator's internal defenses hummed to life. Ceiling turrets rotated. Wall panels opened to reveal magnetic pulse launchers. Targeting lights danced on foreheads. Holt looked at the crew. This ship does not negotiate. They left within the hour, but the message was clear. Not everyone came for safety. Some came to take what remained. The galaxy was still broken, and Holt's ship was the only steady star left in the wreckage. By day 60, Holt had over 700 souls aboard Vindicator. Engineers rewired the outer decks into housing bays. Scientists turned the old weapons storage into makeshift labs. Children played in the zero-G training pods, once used to simulate combat, now filled with laughter and floating blocks. And Holt? He moved among them, a shadow, a presence. He rarely spoke more than a few words. But wherever he went, people fell quiet, not out of fear, but reverence, a strange kind, a mix of gratitude and unease, because they all knew who he was, the man who brought an empire to its knees, the man who burned a homeworld, the man who kept every one of their names in a blood-soaked archive. Some nights, the children whispered about him. Others watched him from corridors. They didn't know how to treat him. He wasn't a leader. He wasn't a villain. He was something else. A warning. On the 75th day, Holt received a transmission, not from a survivor, from a Dargathi, a voice he recognized instantly. "Commander Holt," it said, cracked and broken, "this is Enforcer Kiln, former strategic advisor to the Corps 1 Defense Division. I know you remember me." Holt didn't respond. The voice continued. "I am not reaching out to beg, nor to apologize. I offer something different, knowledge. The location of a hidden vault beneath the Ellerin star, coordinates, data, proof of what we really built." Holt's jaw tightened. "You think you know what we did to Earth," Kiln said. "You only saw the surface. If you want the truth, come, I'll be waiting." The transmission ended, and Holt stood in silence. He didn't trust Kiln, but something in the voice told him this wasn't a trick. It was bait, but not for Holt, for what was left of him. He left the next morning, alone. He didn't announce it, didn't explain, just input the coordinates and jumped into folded space. The survivors watched as the Vindicator vanished. Some cried, some prayed, some feared it would never return. But Holt wasn't chasing war. He was chasing truth, and that, more than any weapon, was what terrified him most. The Ellerin star burned blue in the distance, a violent and unstable dwarf that pulsed in erratic bursts. Around it, a debris field drifted like scattered bones, derelict satellites, fractured cruiser shells, and unmarked wrecks from battles never reported in official records. Holt stared at the scanner feed as the Vindicator coasted into orbit. The signal from Kiln was still active, pinging from a small station nestled in the corona's shadow, hidden by the star's interference field. Only a madman or a desperate soul would hide there. He guessed Kiln was both. As the Vindicator drew closer, the station finally came into view. A rusted relic, barely holding shape, its outer hull warped by decades of solar radiation. It didn't carry any Dargathi insignia. In fact, it looked Terran. That wasn't just suspicious, it was impossible. Holt landed the drop pod alone. No weapons, no armor, just a pressure suit, a silent rage, and a mind prepared to learn the worst. The docking corridor hissed as he entered. Inside, the lights flickered. Gravity was unstable. Everything reeked of rot and betrayal. And at the center of the control room, strapped to a crumbling metal chair, sat Kiln, thinner, older, coughing blood into a stained rag. "You came," Kiln said with a weak smile. "I wasn't sure you would." Holt said nothing. "I was on Core 1 when it fell," Kiln continued. "Saw the sky turn black, heard the scream of the siphon tearing through the mantle. That was your gift to me." Still silence. Kiln coughed again, then gestured weakly toward the console beside him. "I didn't ask you here to beg for my life. It's already ending. I'm here because I want you to understand what you truly destroyed." Holt stepped forward. The air was thick with heat and sulfur. "I destroyed your empire?" Kiln smiled. "No. You destroyed its mask, not its core. He tapped the console, and the screen came alive. Ancient data logs, schematics, decrypted files, Terran language overlays. And then Holt saw it. Dates. Time-stamped before the war. Before the Dargathi even made contact with Earth. Research files, biometric studies, tissue sampling. Impossible, Holt muttered. These files are real, Kiln said. Your world was catalogued, dissected, mapped decades before the official invasion. Holt leaned closer. Photos, videos, audio logs, Earth scientists, engineers, soldiers. Some were labeled as early accessions, others as preliminary host studies. They were harvesting your people long before you saw their ships, Kiln said. Quietly, strategically, through proxies, through staged conflicts and manipulated disasters, entire famines manufactured to weaken resistance before contact. Holt's fists clenched. This was never about war, Kiln said. It was about elimination, not of your species, of your identity, your history. They didn't want to rule you. They wanted to erase us. Kiln nodded, and they almost succeeded. Another file opened. A recorded meeting. Dargathi and non-Dargathi. Aliens Holt had never seen. Leaders from so-called neutral alliances. Political envoys from races that had once claimed solidarity with Earth. They weren't just complicit. They were partners. They helped us, Kiln said, not because they hated you, because they feared you. The footage zoomed in on a map, Earth systems, projected population spikes, technological growth rates, human innovation curves that showed exponential rises in AI development, resource efficiency, even early folded space simulations. They realized what humanity could become, Kiln said, and they made a choice. Better to extinguish the flame than let it become a wildfire. Holt stared at the faces. He recognized some. Ambassadors, coalition leaders. One had even delivered a speech to Earth days before the Dargathi bombardment, claiming intergalactic friendship. "Why are you showing me this?" Holt asked. Kiln's voice cracked. "Because it's not over. The Dargathi are dead. But the ones who helped them? They still sit in their crystal towers, untouched, and they'll rewrite history, say the war was a Terran overreaction, call you a terrorist, a genocidal maniac." He looked Holt in the eye. "Unless you show the truth." Holt stared at the console, at the data, at the betrayal. He'd already avenged Earth. But the story, it was still being buried. "I didn't burn enough," Holt whispered. Kiln laughed. "No, you burned the easy part. The real enemy is quieter, smarter. They don't fly warships, they fly narratives." Holt turned and walked toward the exit. "You'll transmit the files?" "I'll do more than that," Holt said. "I'll make them undeniable." "And what will you do after?" Kiln rasped. "When the whole galaxy sees the truth?" Holt didn't answer. Because he didn't know. Back on the Vindicator, the transmission systems burned hot as Holt decrypted and uploaded every file to the survivors, to Allied channels, to hidden human colonies and former Dargathi enemies. The truth spread like fire. And just like that, the war changed again. The Solari Union, once hailed as peacekeepers, was outed as collaborators. The Mercan clergy, supposedly neutral, had funded the Dargathi research labs. Even the Othari Nexus, a small collective known for anti-war protests, had approved the early scouting missions over Earth. Every name, every signature, every voice burned into the stars, and the galaxy panicked. Denials came quickly. Sanctions, purges, public trials. Some officials even executed their own comrades just to distance themselves from the storm. But it wasn't enough. Because Holt didn't just release data, he released faces, children who were dissected, Civilians who were taken. Real footage, real pain, and real rage. Across dozens of worlds, humans still in hiding saw the truth. And they began to rise, not with ships, but with memory, with purpose. The Ark, Holt's sanctuary, became a beacon, more than a ship now, a living archive, a call to rebuild not just Earth's body, but its voice. And Holt, he remained in orbit, watching the galaxy feel again. Fear, guilt, recognition. But none of that filled the void inside him. He had ripped the masks off their enemies. But he still couldn't bring back what he'd lost. Still couldn't hear his son's laugh in the silence. Still couldn't forgive the galaxy for watching Earth burn and saying nothing. And maybe he couldn't forgive himself either. Silence had returned to the galaxy. But this time it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of awakening. Every system had seen the footage. Every world that once turned away from Earth's pleas now stared at their screens, faces pale, as the hidden history played again and again. The scientists dissecting children, the politicians approving starvation programs, the treaties signed in dark rooms, not to protect, but to erase. Humanity had not been a casualty of war. It had been a target of erasure. And the man who had delivered that truth was no longer just a name. He had become a myth. Commander Holt, the ghost of vengeance, the last Terran. And now the galaxy watched him again, waiting to see what he would do next. Because if Holt declared war on the remaining alliances, millions would follow. If he called for vengeance, they would give it. But Holt said nothing. Because for the first time in years, he didn't know what came next. He sat alone in the command deck of the Vindicator, now orbiting an uncharted planet just outside the ruins of the Dargathi frontier. Below, a terraformed surface began to take shape. Forests, oceans, clean air, built from Earth's remaining genetic banks and seeded by exobio-engineers from the Ark's crew. They called it Second Earth. Not a replica, not a fantasy. Just a chance. A place to begin again. Holt stared at the blue-green sphere, hands clasped in front of him. His beard was thicker now, streaked with white. His face was hard, but the hollowness in his eyes had softened, just barely. He had received over 6,000 transmission requests in the last 3 days, every one of them asking the same thing. "What now, Commander?" He had no answer. He wasn't a politician, not a builder, not a savior. He was a weapon, and weapons didn't rebuild. But maybe they could learn. Footsteps echoed behind him. He didn't have to turn. "Captain Marin," he said. She stepped up beside him. Her uniform wasn't military, just functional. Sturdy boots, rolled sleeves, dust from working down in the atmospheric regulators. "They've named the capital," she said. Holt raised an eyebrow. "Already?" "Yeah, the kids picked it." He nodded once. "What is it?" She smiled. "Redmont." The name hit like a gut punch. He didn't flinch, but his throat tightened. Marin's voice lowered. "They want you to speak, you know. Tomorrow, at the founding." "I'm not," Holt began. "A leader?" she cut in. "You keep saying that. But they're not asking for a ruler, Holt. Just a witness. You saw the worst, lived through it, survived it. That makes you the only one qualified to speak." He didn't answer. "Besides," she added, "they're not looking for perfection, just truth. That's what you gave them. Don't stop now." She left him with that. And for hours, Holt stood there, watching the new world spin, unsure if he belonged on it. He walked the decks that night. The Vindicator was quieter now. No alarms, no weapons primed, just the hum of life support and the soft lights of community quarters. Children played in what used to be the weapons loading bay. Old soldiers taught farming in the torpedo rooms. Hydroponic gardens stretched across what once held fusion missiles. And no one looked at him like a ghost anymore. They looked at him like a man. One who had carried their pain through fire and brought them to the other side. He found himself near the cryopod again. The plant was bigger now, almost up to his waist. Its leaves were strong, deep green, healthy. It leaned toward the light like it wanted to climb out of the pod and root itself into the ship's floor. He touched it gently. It was the only thing on this ship that had never asked him to fight. And maybe that meant something. The next morning he stood at the edge of the new capital, overlooking a valley still half wild. Tents, prefabs, construction bots. Nothing polished, nothing perfect. But it was theirs. Hundreds had gathered. Some wore patches from old Earth factions. Others wore plain clothes, or armor salvaged from the war. But all of them looked forward when Holt stepped up onto the rusted platform that had once been a drop ship wing. He didn't use a script, didn't prepare a speech. He just looked at them and spoke with the same voice that once ordered orbital bombardments. "I was born on Earth," he said. "Not a hero, not a legend, just a kid in Redmont. I watched my world die, watched friends burn, watched my family turn to ash. I spent the next 10 years trying to answer that pain with fire." Silence. "You all know what happened. You lived it, or lost someone to it. I don't need to tell you who to blame. The files did that for me." He looked out across the crowd. But revenge wasn't the end. He gestured towards the valley. "This is." He paused. Let that sit. "Not the end like death. The end of the cycle. We don't exist just to avenge the past. We exist to build something better. That's what Earth always did best. Adapt, grow, push forward when the universe told us to kneel." Some nodded. Others wiped tears. "This isn't about making another empire," Holt said. "It's about making sure no kid ever sees the sky fall the way ours did." He stepped back. That was all he had. But it was enough. The silence that followed wasn't hollow this time. It was reverent. Months passed. The Ark became a full fleet. Supply ships, farming vessels, teaching colonies. Second Earth began to stabilize. A council was formed. Holt wasn't on it. He refused. But they kept a seat empty in his name. He spent most of his time walking. Not planning, not commanding, just watching. He taught children how to grow food. Taught teenagers how to fight. Not to kill, but to defend. He buried the names of his wife and son under a tree that grew taller each week. And for the first time in over a decade, he slept through the night. But the galaxy was not finished with him. Not yet. One night, in the quiet hours before dawn, a transmission came through. Encrypted, familiar, a voice, female, soft, scarred by guilt. "Holt, if you're alive, I need you to hear this. We've found something. In the outer belt, a ship. Not Dargathi, not from any known system. It carries symbols from pre-contact Earth. And inside, we found something else." A pause. A signal. It matches Terran DNA. Holt stood from his bunk, eyes sharp, heartbeat steady. No emotion, just purpose. He activated the comm and answered with a single word. "Send coordinates."